From an insignificant tribal clan, the Mongols seemed to come out of nowhere to rule over the greatest empire in the world before disappearing just as quickly 3 centuries later. Their lands reached out across the Mediterranean to the Pacific, from the Arabian Desert in the south to the tundra of northern Russia, and from the forests of Poland to the mountains of China. At the empire's height, the Mongols controlled a staggering 12 million square miles of territory. But what was it like to live under their governance? How did they treat their subjects, and just why did they almost hunt owls to the edge of extinction? Welcome to Medieval Madness. Rise. In the early days of the 13th century, on the East Asian steppe, Genghis Khan, known as Genghis in the West, meaning universal ruler, brought together the Mongols and other tribal people and began to build the largest empire in the world. The farmers of Mongolia relied on the land to support them. They led a nomadic lifestyle, moving their flocks of sheep, horses, and goats to areas with ample water and other resources, always afraid of drought and disease that were disastrous for them and their families. Khan united the tribes and helped to alleviate this instability by keeping taxes under control, creating rural collectives, reforming the laws, and bringing in a form of military feudal government. A lot of the Mongols' success came from Genghis Khan's fondness for adopting new technology from their conquered enemies. Using gunpowder, leather armor, stirrups, and composite bows meant that the Mongol army was way ahead of the game in advancement. During combat, tactics such as hit-and-run batteries, arrow storms, psychological warfare, and a reward system for loyal warriors meant that the Mongols became the most successful army of their time. The empire grew exponentially, continually adapting as it went over a period of 162 years. Loved to death. One peculiar side effect caused by the Mongols' massive territorial expansion was the hunting of owls. It was so aggressive that in some regions they almost became extinct. It all stemmed from a dramatic and compelling early myth. Long before the Mongols became all-powerful conquerors, they lived beyond a monumental mountain range. There was only one way in and out of the mountains, along a single road that passed through an abandoned castle. The fortress put fear into the hearts of anyone who dared to pass through it, because petrifying noises could be heard when anyone ventured too near. So the Mongols remained cut off from the rest of the world. One day, a hunter came by. He was so engrossed in catching his quarry that he arrived unexpectedly at the castle and was filled with terror. Then, to his surprise, he saw an owl perched on the gate. The hunter dared to go inside and found that the unnatural noise was just the wind blowing through the stones. In that way, the only thing standing in the way of the Mongols was erased. Later, the Mongols revered the owl as a celestial messenger that had shown them the way. For that reason, they decorated their hats with owl plumage and were happy to pay large sums to the merchants who could provide those feathers. The Dominican missionary Ricardo of Montecroce, who was responsible for bringing back the legend of the owl in the early 14th century, went on to say that, quote, "And thus the Tartars, Mongols, return bad for good to their friend the owl. For while they say that they honor it, they kill it and skin it and make for themselves crowns out of the plumage." Conquering vast swaths of land was a lucrative business, and the Mongols found themselves with obscene amounts of money, meaning their leaders could buy whatever they wanted. With such great spending power on offer, and aware of the immense profits that could be made, traders from all over the world were attracted to the Mongol court. If the Mongols wanted owl feathers, then they would have them. And with the number of birds inside the empire dwindling because of demand, there were plenty of hunters in the west who were happy to seek them out, and so the birds were driven to the brink of extinction everywhere. Owl feathers were just one of a plethora of products that the Mongols valued. Other merchants, such as the father of the famed Venetian explorer Marco Polo, brought prized gems to the court, others brought pearls. The wealth and huge purchasing power of the Mongols quickly changed the lives of their new subjects, and it wasn't just the commoners who had to accept their conquerors, but also the elites who had to quickly adapt to the different laws and authority of their new masters. Conquest. In the Eurasia of the 13th century, the Mongols were everywhere. Despite establishing their capital city at Karakorum, their huge encampments dotted the landscape as they continued with their nomadic lifestyle. There were thousands of large tents and hundreds of thousands more wagons for transportation. The Franciscan missionary and explorer William of Rubruck wrote that he was struck with awe as the dwellings had the appearance of a large city, stretching out lengthways and with inhabitants scattered around in every direction for a distance of 3 or 4 leagues. Which kinda sounds like Glastonbury. The explorer Ibn Battuta describes one of these campsites as a vast city on the move with its inhabitants, mosques and bazaars. These city camps were surrounded by millions of livestock grazing on the land. If the great ruler was travelling with the encampment, there would also be a golden tent where the imperial ladies are amassed with resident populace. The Mongols had an unwavering belief that they had been granted divine consent to rule the world because of heaven. After visiting the court of the second Khan Ogadai, the Chinese envoy Peng Dia wrote that, quote, "In their everyday speech, they always say, relying on the strength of immortal heaven and the fortunate protection of the emperor, in all affairs that they decide to take, they say heaven wants it like that. Regarding anything that people have already done, they say heaven is aware. There is no affair that is not attributed to heaven. From the Lord of the Tartars to his common people, it is thus." Threat. Well known for their brutality, the Mongols could be merciful to those who succumbed to them quickly. Those communities who threw up their hands and surrendered before a military invasion had even begun could expect preferential treatment, like the Silesian kingdom of Armenia. For the people there, life went on much the same as it had always done, they just paid their taxes to a different regime. But resistance to the Mongol army meant death and desolation. Even Pope Innocent IV realized he was not exempt from the threat of Mongol intimidation when the great Khan Guyuk, grandson of Genghis and third Khagan of the empire, sent him a message that read, quote, "Now you should say with a sincere heart, we will be your subjects, and if you ignore the order of God, we shall know you as my enemy." And nobody wanted to be Khan's enemy. The Armenian envoy Sempad noted that when travelling to the Mongol court, there were many abandoned settlements on the way, strewn with the bones of those who had dared to resist the Mongol armies. In 1246, the same year that Guyuk's letter had arrived, the Pope's envoy to the Khan travelled through Kiev and reported that, quote, "The Mongols attacked Russia where they made great havoc, destroying cities and fortresses and slaughtering men. And they laid siege to Kiev, the capital of Russia. After they had besieged the city for a long time, they took it and put the inhabitants to death. When we were journeying through that land, we came across countless skulls and bones of dead men lying about on the ground." Kiev had been a very large and thickly populated town, but now it had been reduced almost to nothing. For there are at the present time scarce 200 houses there, and the inhabitants are kept in complete slavery. Once the initial invasion was over, many communities found themselves integrated into the vast empire and taxes had to be paid. Artisans such as ironworkers, goldsmiths, potters, and weavers, along with other skilled workers such as miners, were needed to grow the economy and were often spared by Mongol commanders. Farmers and shepherds were always going to be needed, but craftsmen were an asset to be used if the empire was going to advance. As a consequence, these workers were often rounded up, taken from their homes, and shipped thousands of miles away to wherever the Mongols had the greatest need of them. In 1241, the Mongols continued their invasion into Poland and Hungary, so they transported a group of German miners from Transylvania far into their empire, forcing the men to mine precious metals and create weapons for the offensive. Arts and culture. After the Mongol ruler Hugul, brother to Mongek Khan, conquered Baghdad, he made the place named Marageh his home. Always interested in new ideas and technology, Hugul surrounded himself with a group of intellectuals gathered from across his lands. Top of the agenda for the philosophers and scientists was the alchemy of turning base metals into gold, and the forecasting of future events by the use of astrology. Hugul also had an observatory built along with a magnificent library. It was at Marageh that the accomplished polymath physician and theologian Nasir al-Din Atulsi worked, overseeing the observatory, and the Sufi poet Awahadi Maraghi lived until his death in 1338. As far as faith went, the Mongols were pretty tolerant of other people's religions, and most inhabitants across their vast kingdom were allowed to continue practicing their beliefs unchecked. But there was a condition to this. The Mongols insisted that the followers of all and every religion under their control use their divine powers for the good of the empire. Religious leaders were a resource to be utilized like any other. Everyone, both rich and poor, noble and lowly, had to toe the line to survive under their new rulers. The Mongols' reputation for horrific brutality to any opposition acted as a deterrent to any who dissented, and it worked. In the early years of the empire, there were hardly any rebellions. In fact, the sense of fear was palpable. The historian Ibn al-Athir describes how the Mongols, quote, passed over the lands like clouds driven by the wind, and spared none, slaying women and men and children, ripping open pregnant women and killing unborn babies, making the people so afraid that they froze with fear when just a single soldier would enter a village. Decline and fall. Even though the Mongols had a reputation for destruction and widespread murder, the empire eventually reached a period of relative peace around the year 1279. Over time, they absorbed the culture, religions, dishes, and customs of the people they had conquered. Really, the death of Genghis Khan in 1227 was the beginning of the end for the empire. Clashes between his descendants resulted in civil war, and the empire began to implode in on itself, ending all hopes of a global conquest. By 1480, its rule in Eastern Europe was at an end, but it had left a huge impact on millions of people through either culture, commerce, conflict, or control, both within the empire and beyond. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you'd like to see more of these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, I hope you have a great week. Cheers!